Tang's Tips for Writers, Episode 1, Show and Tell Explained. Hello Watchers, we're going to do something a little different today. I'll be scrolling through the script for this video as I read it, so whether you prefer to listen, to read, or to have both, I've got you covered. That said, a very special hello to any writers from Worldsmyths. If you don't know what Worldsmyths is, I will simply say we are an honest and supportive community of international writers who help one another to improve their writing. We are also, officially and legally, an indie publisher headquartered out of Alberta, Canada. Exciting stuff, that. There is a link to our Discord server in the description below if you'd like to take a look around, as well as a link to my Discord server and Patreon, which I just remembered because it's new. And now that I've done my plugs for Worldsmyths and my own stuff, let's get into this inaugural episode of Tang's Tips for Writers. Show and Tell is the start of a writing tips series I've been wanting to work on for literally years. If you have a particular topic you'd like me to cover, you can leave me a comment below or on my Discord server or on the Worldsmyths Discord server. I have a long list already, but I will prioritize requested information. Now, if you've been writing for any length of time and seeking serious criticism of your work, you've probably been told, show, don't tell. And if you're one of the authors who submitted to the Worldsmyths anthology this year, you might be all too familiar with this terminology of showing versus telling from comments left on your story. Like most writing advice, this is a good idea sometimes, but not all the time. It's also a concept that is a lot less black and white than it sounds like it would be from that phrase. I personally struggled a bit with understanding this advice myself when it was first given to me, because these words are a bit vague and a little misleading. As a writer, you are, in a very literal sense, telling your reader everything, and you are showing them everything with your words. So let's try and clarify what is actually meant by this phrase, and then we'll get into why both are important and have their place in your writing. Finally, part 2 to this video will be me taking you through a single paragraph, line by line, to analyze what could be better and how. Exposition, or informing, is generally what people are referring to as telling or info dumping, but a certain amount of simple, no-frills exposition is essential to a good story. If you try to prettify your informational elements excessively, or even just constantly, you run into purple prose. More on that in part 2. You can't cut all dry information either. Without that exposition, it is extremely difficult to inform your reader about key world-building elements that differ from our own reality. And even in a contemporary setting, without sci-fi or fantasy elements, exposition is important for presenting data like biographical details, world or regional history, and distant events that make the story make sense, or just add a bit of color. The line can blur a bit with setting up scenes by establishing physical objects like architectural elements, materials, landscapes, furniture, vehicles, crowds, and all that other lovely background stuff. Stuff which is critical because it fills in what would otherwise be an empty void in your reader's imagination, with random things and characters popping in and out of existence as they are mentioned or forgotten. We'll talk about that in another episode too. Always a very unpleasant experience for me as a reader. Likewise, emotions can fall into either the telling or showing category, depending on how you communicate them. But we'll talk about that more in its own episode. You see what I mean about having a long list already? So let's switch gears and talk about showing. A more accurate term would be immersing your reader in the story, making them feel the world. Not just feel it emotionally, but in a physical sense, by tapping into sense memory with vivid descriptions. You can use sights, sounds, smells, tastes, basically any way in which you as a human process the physical world around you, or physical reactions to it, such as sweaty palms or a neck prickle. These vivid elements of emotion and physical sensation tap into a reader's imagination and are the primary means of creating and maintaining immersion and or eliciting visceral responses. Like exposition, immersive sensory information has its purpose and place and an ugly excessive side. All right, we've defined what is meant by telling and showing and that both are important. The next part gets very involved, so we're going to cut here and I'll see you, you'll see me, well, you'll see my script again in part 2. Take care, watchers, and keep on writing.